Sitting here after watching the newest episode of The Acolyte, I find myself conflicted on my opinion. I really want to love this series and everything new it brings to the table, and especially concerning the mystery side of the story, there's been a lot to love about it. But part of me is also struggling to just really get into it. I've yet to go back and rewatch any of these episodes after my initial viewing, and looking back there hasn't been anything that's blown me away and made me want to rewatch an episode yet. I had seen a lot of excitement concerning this episode from those that saw advanced screeners, but I found myself split on this episode. Some parts I liked a lot, there were some parts that I really didn't, and then a lot that I kinda just couldn't care less about. Diving straight into the beginning of the episode, we start on Kofar in the present day, going back to where we left off at the end of the second episode. It was really interesting to see the dotted circle symbols scribbled into the walls everywhere inside his hut, what I'm presuming was the same symbol of the Brendok Witch Coven. Although we learn that he was stationed there by the Jedi Order and not necessarily a self-imposed exile, it's obvious that something happened in the past that traumatized Kelnaka in relation to this coven of witches. We sadly don't get an explanation in this episode, but we know there's a link there that must be explored in future episodes, because it wasn't like a small Easter egg in the background. The camera focused on these symbols multiple times within the first few minutes, meaning there's something there. I was definitely disappointed by how little we got of Kelnaka in this episode, and I guess in the series as a whole so far as well. He was introduced in the final scene of the premiere as this exiled Wookiee Jedi, super interesting. He pretty much only had the one scene in the third episode with a young Osha as he was fixing his bike, but other than that, there hasn't really been anything that we've gotten from him, either in this episode too. He just shows up dead at the end, but that's a whole other can of worms to get into. We go back to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, and this entire scene with Osha and Jackie just fell flat for me. We see Jackie and the other Padawans training with their wooden sticks as Osha observes and says goodbye before leaving. She proved her innocence and now just wants to dip out, not wanting anything to do with the Jedi or her sister. At first I figured that she wanted to go back and look for her sister on her own, but she really does resent May after all this time. Even though part of both Osha and May still care for each other, they try to suppress these feelings and move on with their lives. And Osha just wants to leave May to the Jedi now. Somebody has to stop her, but it isn't going to be her. But of course, it can't be that simple, because as she's about to leave, she's stopped by Sol to help with her mission. For this initial scene in the temple, I guess it felt bland to me, nothing overly interesting about the characters or the setting. But the second season in the temple felt extremely artificial to me, between the sets, the character designs, and the costumes. I haven't been able to put my finger on the exact reason why, but there was something bugging me and I can't figure out what. Here we see a bunch of Jedi observing a hollow of May's fighting technique, and there were some familiar species, but at first I didn't think there were any we knew. The Saurian honestly looked nothing like Yadi-Mundi, but since his species is relatively rare and nearing extinction, it does make sense that it would be him. One of the Jedi questions whether May's training comes from a splinter order or something worse, and although they have yet to say the term Sith in the series, it feels like that's what she's alluding to. Vernestra also believes that the Jedi was the one to train May, something that has been a theory by fans, that a fallen Jedi is the master that trained May, but there hasn't been as much evidence pointing towards that conclusion. The interesting thing here from this discussion was Vernestra's desire to not tell the High Council these murders, because they would be obliged to inform the Senate, which would then lead to fear and mistrust towards the Jedi. Not only does this show how the Jedi are already connected to the politics of the Republic, but they're also extremely removed from the happenings of the Jedi Order as a whole. Throughout the main movies, we've always seen the High Council meetings, making it feel like they knew everything important that was happening. But now we're on the more basic levels of the Jedi Order, dealing with what would be considered the normal and average Jedi, not the Grand Master Yodas and Obi-Wan Kenobis. This is likely how the Return of the Sith, if it occurs in this series, will go unnoticed within the Jedi Order, because this subsect of Jedi will either die or keep it a secret. Even though I did have my problems with the scene and the way it looked on screen, I did really like how it broadened the mystery to a larger Jedi body to discuss the problem, introducing more characters and perspectives. It spreads the mystery out to make it more interesting, rather than keeping it contained to only a few select Jedi like we had in the premiere, even though a good amount of these Jedi go unnamed. Eventually, Sol goes to recruit Osha to the mission, who ends up having to wear white, civilian robes for the mission, and they looked so weird and out of place on screen in comparison to the other Jedi's robes, where I knew it had to be a purposeful decision. They completely reminded me of Ahsoka's white robes, of her moving on from the Jedi but becoming more in tune with the Force's intent, and we do see that in this episode. Osha's able to slowly open herself back up to the Force and feel the life flowing through things again, like she does with the bug. Although it does end up getting killed, which she feels responsible for, it is a step forward for her. Osha's character also reminded me a lot of Ahsoka in this episode, in the way she was treated by the other Jedi, specifically Yord. She's a former Jedi who left the Order but is still in good faith with them and helping them on a mission. She's getting the citizen treatment here. In Osha's case, she isn't still highly trained and strong in the Force, so she can't defend herself completely. But still along the same lines, it doesn't feel like Yord completely trusts her. He even wants her to hand over the blaster because it's property of the Jedi Order. The fact that he's a by-the-book Jedi that kinda shows everything wrong with the Order right now can make him frustrating to watch at times, but he and Osha do have a short dialogue that says a lot about their characters. Yord felt like a very distant Jedi rather than an old friend during this moment, as he places full trust in Sol and his reasoning for having Osha along, even though she wants him to potentially take care of May if the need arises. A few other smaller things about the Jedi during this part of the episode. Basil was an excellent inclusion in the episode, and was really interesting to watch on screen, but it would have been neat if they made him more into a character of his own. That Keldor that appears briefly with the Jedi party is not Plo Koon, it's a new Jedi named Ithia Pan. And Jeki spouts a lot of wisdom in this episode, especially after Osha feels guilty for the bug's death. But to me it felt more like the emotionless readings of the Jedi, rather than supportive or comforting as a friend. Moving over to May's side of the episode for a bit, we spent a good amount of time with her and Kymir on Kofar in this episode, and with Kymir being here for Kalnaka and nearby for Torben's death as well, it made me question whether he was on location for Andara's death, maybe watching over his assassin to make sure she finishes the job. With the way he speaks in the first scene, it sounds like he risked his life to come and scout out the planet beforehand in order to find Kalnaka's hiding spot, so he risked his life for May. There's absolutely more to him than meets the eye, that much is clear here. We also learned that these killings aren't entirely personal for May. She made a deal with her master to kill these 4 Jedi. For what purpose, we don't know, but if she fails, her master will kill her. Kymir also mentions that he didn't make a deal with the master, but that he owes him, and that's where he leaves it. Especially after the way this episode ends, signs continue to point towards the fact that Kymir is the master, but it's a very interesting choice of words by him here. After a lengthy discussion over how one is supposed to kill a Jedi without a weapon, to which May believes is impossible, the two of them finally stop for rest, and I found it off how Kymir was rushing through the forest. At first I assumed he was concerned over nightfall, but not even the Jedi were that worried. More like he probably sensed them behind them and wanted to keep moving. He also goes off on his own to get water for a short period of time, which looking back now, feels definitely like he went to go kill Naka himself. Perhaps he sensed May's disillusionment during their walk, but other than that I don't understand why he would go and take care of things himself, because it isn't until he comes running back and gets stuck in May's trap that she expresses her change in heart, which I'll admit was a turn I was not expecting at all. It's a complete 180 for her character, so much so that I would completely understand if it ends up rubbing fans the wrong way, because she talks about how she doesn't need to keep the deal with her master anymore, and that her loyalty is to Osha, not the master. She was fearing the master not even 10 minutes ago, but now she doesn't seem to second guess betraying him and turning herself into the Jedi. But I guess that shows how much she still loves Osha after all this time, even if her sister does now hate her guts. May also thinks she knows something, or someone that will get her out of Jedi prison, which confused me a bit since she doesn't know the identity of her master, so what else is there to tell them? We spend a bit more time with the Jedi in the forest, and although it had been in the back of my head earlier that this was where the Sith Master shows up and we get the big lightsaber fight, the feeling was now much more prevalent, especially with Sol sensing the darkness nearby. He also tells Osha that they both have to face their past, as he will explain everything to her once they get May back to the ship, so it sounds like he'll explain what really happened to Brendok to her, but now this has me concerned that he won't make it out of this alive. May eventually finds Kalnaka in his hideout, but he's already been taken care of with a lightsaber slash through the chest, and with her running inside as the Jedi gather outside, it only makes May look even more guilty, which is really unfortunate now that she's decided to not be a horrible assassin. But I loved how the lighting shifted from warm to cold to give us that feeling of dread as the Sith Master arrives. Everyone's able to sense his presence, and even us as viewers can sense it through the visual cues. And then he descends like Mary Poppins behind Osha, and based solely on the wardrobe and physical figure, it's got to be Kymir. It looks like him, and it makes more sense for Kymir to have hidden his identity, surprisingly get trapped, free himself, and take on this new identity, than for the Sith Master to have been following the two of them to Kofar. I'm pretty sure Kymir was also carrying a bag of his own, where he could have just stored his helmet and lightsaber if need be. The red lightsaber ignites, followed by the many different colors of the Jedi, and it was such a cool moment to witness. But I do hate how the ending happens. The episode cuts off seemingly in the middle of the battle, after Osha and the Jedi have been tossed back with the Force by the Sith Master. It feels anticlimactic, like they're trying too hard to get the viewers to come back next week. If they ended it a few seconds earlier, like when the red lightsaber ignites and we get that chilling shot of him standing in front of Osha, cut there, that would be a much better way to end it than what we had here. So yeah, some things I loved, some things I strongly disliked. Looking back on all of these episodes past the golden rays of new Star Wars content that shine on them when I see it for the first time, they've all been pretty average to me. I think the next episode has the chance to do something really special and make me love the series more, but we'll have to wait and see. What did you think of this episode of The Acolyte? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to like the video and subscribe for coverage of the series as a new episode premieres every week, and remember to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Thank you all for watching, and remember, the Force will be with you, always.